Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Interventional Endoscopist podcast. I'm your host, Munkabal Sachdev, and today I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Dr. Austin Chiang, who many people who watch and listen to this podcast know as a big name in social media, but also the Chief Medical Officer of Endoscopy and Gastroenterology at Medtronic. Austin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Now, thanks for taking time. I mean, between your whirlwind travels and everything like that, be able to cut out some time for me, I'm super appreciative. So thank you for doing that.
Of course.
So in a brief introduction to anyone who's not familiar with Austin or anybody who's been living under a rock for the last few years, he is the Chief Medical Officer at Medtronic, as I said. He's also an Assistant Professor of Medicine and the Director, an author. He's the author of a book that I have here, Gut, an Owner's Guide, and it just got released. Austin, when did it come out? About 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, about 3 weeks ago at this point.
Okay. Available online, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute. I got it at Barnes & Noble, but you can get it from Amazon or Kindle or whatever you like to read books on. So it's really interesting read for anybody who is in GI, and I suspect if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably interested in gastroenterology, or I hope you are. So Austin has also won several awards. He's won awards for healthcare disruption. He's won awards as a medical influencer and several awards on the social media aspect. I met you, Austin, for the first time at a medical advisory board meeting for Doximity, and that was roughly 2017, maybe it was right around there, just before the pandemic. And also after that, I came to, and you're at that meeting, you meet other gastroenterologists, you try to see why are they there? Why are you there? And, I found out about your social media presence, and then I started following you. And then obviously, being in the interventional world, doing procedures, we work with Medtronic, and then now became more familiar with you after that. So again, thanks for being here, and welcome.
Thank you.
Another reason to talk to you, Austin, is that you've had a very unique journey. You're a young leader. You kind of break the mold in a lot of different ways. As a leader, I mean, I think you're probably the first chief medical officer was hired to be and is under the age of 50, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And I think you're the first medical officer that Medtronic hired. Is that true?
Yes, for the gastrointestinal endoscopy business, that is true. And in fact, I think I'm the only gastroenterologist kind of in this role at any sort of major publicly traded medical device company.
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique thing. I think the leaders of Medtronic, when they made the decision to go with you, I think they were looking for somebody who could connect with the next batch of interventional endoscopists, which I believe is the young kids, so to speak, for lack of a better term, who are all in training, because you can speak to them in a way that somebody who lectures on the lecture circuit can't. You're involved in the way my daughter consumes media. You're in social media, you're in available online, TikTok, all those things, and I think that's what gets you in front of them, as well as the fact that you're very well accomplished on the endoscopic front.
Well, thank you. I feel like that's always been important, is just, my credibility among my peers. And I cared a lot about that. And before I joined Medtronic, right, that was sort of the path that I was on. So I wanted to make sure that, within the academic world, that was solid before I, did anything with social media, right? Like, I wanted to make sure that if I didn't have that credibility, then the whole social media thing wouldn't really stick as well.
No, for sure. I think people can fool the masses for a small amount of time, but if you don't know what you're talking about, if you're not credible, like you said, it fails, and I think that's very evident when you follow along on different people who are speaking on social media these days, that if they don't come across as genuine, as educated, as just in the know, people don't follow along. And so I think that's extremely important, like you said. Austin, I wanted to give you a second just before we get started talking about, the book and Medtronic and all those things. Give me a little bit about your background for the people listening, or the people who are, going to watch this. A little bit about your family, your childhood, where you grew up, how you became a physician, etc.
Yeah. So I grew up in Southern California, and actually moved abroad to Taiwan when I was 10. And my parents are, originally from Taiwan, so it was an easy transition back for them. And for me, I went to an international school while I was there through middle school and high school before coming back to the States to pursue the rest of my education. I went to Duke for undergrad, was at Columbia for medical school and for internal medicine residency. And then I went on to a GI fellowship at Brigham and Women's, where I also did a second fellowship in bariatric endoscopy. And at the same time, also obtained a master's in public health while I was there from Harvard, and then completed all my training with a final year of advanced endoscopy fellowship at Jefferson in Philadelphia. And that's ultimately kind of what landed me my first faculty position there. And it's been an interesting journey because, I wasn't one of those people from the get-go who knew that I was going to do gastroenterology when I started medical school. It was really, I was open to all fields and all ideas within medicine, and kind of found my way just through trial and error, and tried to be very introspective about, what my interests were. And ultimately it was because, I really enjoyed the variety of gastroenterology. I enjoyed how we were taking things that were more invasive and making them less invasive. And with that, a lot of the technology and innovation that comes with that. And ultimately the culture of our field. I think that there's something special about that. And actually what ended up being the reason why I seriously considered GI was because a lot of my friends in residency were going into GI. And so I asked myself, why is it that the people I like around me are all going into this field? And so that's really what led me down this path. And like I said, the GI and making sure that my clinical foundation was strong was really my top priority. And then the social media thing was a side interest that I've cultivated over the past decade. And it's really rooted in truly wanting to educate the general public, because as many of us have seen, there have been patients who would, come into the hospital because of things that they've heard on the news or through media or social media. That's just absolute misinformation. And I realized early on that if we weren't out there kind of educating ourselves as the people who are trained in these areas, that then there would be a lot of bad, misleading information out there. So that's really what drove me towards that space. But I always told myself that, what, as much as I love being on social media and creating content, I needed to make sure that the clinical piece was solid before I could really do that. And ultimately, like, this journey to medtech has also been quite the surprise, which I know we'll probably getting more into in a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the whole thing about the misinformation and everything. I think it's almost like, the people spreading the misinformation are the quote unquote bad guys, and we have to have the good guys like you who want to put themselves out there and can do that to kind of combat, all the misinformation that we deal with. So, I mean, it's not an easy task, and it's definitely a labor of love for somebody who, and it requires a lot of courage. It's not something that most of us are comfortable with to, make these videos, and sometimes you have to do the dances and stuff on TikTok or whatever, but like those are, I got 18 left feet, I think, so I don't think I can do that.
Yeah. But it's all about packaging the information, I think, in a way that will reach people that don't even know that they need that information. I think that they're already, right? Like, we often are talking about wanting to educate one another within our field. Then the next step is educating patients. But then a lot of the people out there, like those who need to learn about colorectal cancer screening, for instance, like, don't even know that that's something that they need to do. So how do we package that information in a way that's going to get to them, that they sort of inadvertently come across that information? That's always been kind of the main target audience for me. And to your point, I feel like I've gone through the ringer with all the different, pitfalls of social media, and I've learned the hard way sometimes. But that's the reason why I'm able to share that experience with our colleagues. And we take this space, this intersection between healthcare and social media for granted in a way these days. But 10 years ago, it wasn't seen as something that was important. And I was actually discouraged by a lot of our colleagues from doing that.
Right.
And on the flip side, was encouraged by others to actually turn it into an academic pursuit and kind of treat it in a way that would be respected when in our field. And I think it ultimately took like a global pandemic to
Yeah.
show that social media truly can impact public health outcomes, impact public opinion of health professionals. And so now we kind of understand, oh, they actually go hand in hand.
Well, and if you think about it, right? I mean, the way that we've educated in medicine in our classrooms hasn't changed since the time of Hippocrates. I mean, we're sitting in classrooms and we have somebody up front talking to us. And what did we do when we go to hospitals? Like I'm in private practice, as you know, so we got asked by the hospital, hey, do you want to do a colon cancer awareness event? So we said sure. And this was back in 2010 or 11. Went to a conference room again, stood up in front of a stage and a screen, and there were a bunch of chairs and cookies and lemonade. We were doing the exact same thing that our lecturers did for us in medical school. We're doing that for the community. And honestly, that's probably, I mean, how many of us really enjoy sitting in a lecture theater and being, lectured to? I mean, you might like the subject matter, but the entire process is boring. And now we're taking that same boring way of educating ourselves and we're saying to patients, this is how I'm going to educate you. Social media at least makes it interesting in a different way. It doesn't have to be, I mean, it's not just because of the TikTok style or the Twitter style or whatnot. It's just the fact that it's a different way to get in message out to people that they enjoy.
Exactly. Exactly.
So when you're in fellowship, or when you were in internal medicine residency, who are some of the mentors that kind of influenced your pathway to where you are right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously going through medical training, some of the direct mentors that I came across were those who were, on service with me. And ultimately, like when I explored gastroenterology, some of the folks that I came across because of my interest in interventional endoscopy was kind of my first encounter with GI were John Paneros and at Columbia and Peter Green was another mentor in the celiac space there. But actually, within internal medicine, during my residency years, another key mentor was Dr. Eve Slater, and I often, speak about her in some of my talks. But she was the first female chief resident at Mass General, then became a cardiologist, then went into pharma, and ultimately became Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. And after all of that, she decided to go back to Columbia and staff the internal medicine residence clinic. And she pulled me aside one day, and I don't know what it was that, like, how we got to this topic, but she actually encouraged me to think kind of more globally about my career. She's like, I don't know what it is, but I feel like just don't limit yourself to kind of a traditional clinical career. Think more globally. And I don't know. I didn't know exactly what to make of that in the moment, but I kept that, tucked away. And when it came time to explore this whole Medtronic opportunity, I that sort of came back to the forefront, and I actually contacted her and said, you know what you said 10 plus years ago really stood out to me. And I feel like this is an opportunity where I'm actually seeing that like put in practice. But yeah, I mean, further along in my training, some direct mentors when I was doing GI fellowship at Brigham and Women's where Chris Thompson was a huge influence for me because he kind of pioneered the entire endoscopy space. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was there and exposed to everything that he was doing, I don't know if I would have pursued that kind of route. And on top of that, kind of going back to this whole med tech role I'm in now, he's so entrepreneurial and innovative and has multiple startups going on the side. I think even though I wasn't directly involved in those, just knowing that he was able to do all that at the same time just opened my eyes to the possibility of there being other avenues. And it's become very clear to me, I think, over the past, few years that being able to diversify your experience outside of clinical practice is becoming increasingly important as a lot of clinicians are experiencing burnout these days.
Yeah.
And so I'm very, very grateful that, these seeds were kind of planted, along the way that have led me to where I am now.
No, that's yeah. I mean, that's definitely, it's really important to be able to have people who believe in you and also, to kind of give you that guidance along the way. And Dr. Thompson, I mean, he's another guy who needs no introduction. Everybody knows how great he is with the bariatric side and then obviously the startup world. So That's really good that, and amazing experiences that you've had there. Um, so let's talk about that and move to the next step to like kind of your journey to becoming the chief medical officer over at Medtronic. Kind of how did that come about and kind of put that out there a little bit with the steps you took and how that became an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I fully acknowledge that my story is quite unusual, but the long story short is that my former, boss, the former president of Medtronic Endoscopy, Gio DiNapoli, actually cold called me and said, we've never had a chief medical officer for this business. Would you consider? And that was definitely not what I expected to hear when I, picked up the phone. But again, I think a lot of people say that it's really where preparation meets opportunity. And I think along the way, right, like out of training, I had been consulting for several medical device companies, Medtronic included. And, I brought up some ideas and I was just kind of thinking about, again, my angle from social media and communicating with the general public and educating about certain conditions that we treat using Medtronic products or to help diagnose using Medtronic products. And I think that sort of messaging found its way to Geo. And then there were others within Medtronic who had previously gotten to know me through GI societies who were now working within the company that also put my name in the hat. And ultimately that's how it came about. And I said, I didn't expect to be faced with this sort of a decision early on in my career at this, just because to your point, a lot of the chief medical officers or other people in roles similar like to this are people with decades of experience and who have a very different perspective of like where they want their career to be at and how they're going to approach a role like this. And so I said I would do this. I wanted to jump in full force, but I also wanted to make sure that I didn't lose my procedural skills, and I wanted to maintain my credibility among my proceduralist peers. And so I said I would only do it if I could keep practicing at least part-time. So that's what I'm currently doing now is I practice part-time, several days a month, doing procedures, seeing patients, and then I'm full-time at Medtronic. And it's been, a very busy 2.5 years that I've been doing this so far, but it's been super rewarding and just, I'm learning every day.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the busy part also is I think, people probably don't realize how much you kind of quote unquote live out of a suitcase. I mean, I think when I follow your posts, I'm like, okay, today he's in Berlin, tomorrow he's in London, then he's in California. Now all of a sudden he's, in Alaska or whatever. It's like, it's and on the one hand, traveling as much as you're doing, but the other hand, like the different clothing you have to take from the different you're going.
I think I'm very good at packing. Yes.
So the next thing I want to talk about again is I showed this earlier was the book, and afterwards in the links I'll put a link to the Amazon page for anybody who's interested. Talk about that. I know you're my guess, and we haven't talked about this before, but my guess, with your passion for education on the social media aspect, I think it's kind of a natural progression to go from teaching on a video or on a reel or whatever the case might be to the not a stereotypical, but the traditional book form.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it makes a lot of sense that I would put out a book. I would say that it wasn't, I didn't think that I would be putting out a book this soon. And again, it just like was a happenstance type of situation where the publisher actually reached out to me and said, we have this book idea. We think you would be perfect to write it because we want you to take your social media voice, be able to distill down a complex concept into something that's understandable for the general public. And to me, I thought, interesting. Like I for some reason, I thought that maybe this had already been done,
right?
Because it's an illustrated kind of colorful format. And apparently there's just not a book like that out there. And I said, well, this is a tremendous opportunity to educate and debunk myths and also highlight some other areas within GI that we often don't hear about in the gut health section of your bookstore. Often those books are talking about diet and things like that, which is really important, but they don't talk about kind of the practicalities of, going to see your doctor or going into the hospital or what the procedures mean that you're being recommended. So I wanted to make sure that I got a chance to incorporate all of that. And the publisher gave me a lot of leeway to craft that. And yeah, ultimately I loved that this publisher, specifically DK, which is one of the Penguin Random House companies, reached out because I grew up reading some of their books. They make the eyewitness guides, the travel guides, and they have these like colorful, artsy, fun books. And I couldn't be more happy that this is like the format that of the first book that I'm writing is like a pretty book that's fun to read and could probably sit on anyone's coffee table and stand on its own. So again, just very lucky that it happened when it did. And I said, all right, I'm going to do whatever I can to make it happen, because on top of everything else I'm doing, I had to figure out how to make this work. And I basically wrote it in record speed. And it was a very, very chaotic process, but I'm glad I'm, was able to do it and got it out there. And just able to say that, I'm proud that it's out there.
I've been reading it. I haven't finished it, but I have been listening to it on Kindle form and also reading it this way. But I did pick it up from Barnes and Noble. And to your point about the gut health section, there's a bunch of books about this diet, that diet, and really nothing about GI health. And I had a hard time finding it initially because I didn't know, it was broken up in sections by diet, by, this and by that, weight loss, all those things. And then and so it wasn't going to be alphabetized by author because it's just different sections. And then I remembered looking online and seeing that it was this, yellow color. And I just took a step back and looked around and I immediately found it. It was very easy to find. The only thing that I didn't realize was the size is a little smaller than what I thought it was going to be, because online you can't tell. So I was looking around for yellow book, boom, found it, and that was the first thing I pulled off the shelf. But it reads really well. I was telling you earlier, in my opinion, it's perfect for a patient. And I think that, being in a practice, this is something that we would definitely want to have in our waiting room for people that are sitting around, and when they're bored of reading the same People magazine over and over again, this is something that would interest them. But on top of that, it's actually advanced enough that like a high school student who has an interest in science or in medicine, or even a college student in a 101 or 102 class, this would be perfect to get them the basic information they need to kind of pursue their studies further or move it down. But it's really well written. And I mean, congratulations on that again. So what about, in your opinion, you talk a little bit about it in the book, and obviously Medtronic is at the forefront of AI. What do you kind of see about AI, where we are today, and what do you see it doing in the future for the house of medicine or gastroenterology?
I mean, we're just at the outset of this whole AI movement. I think that we're going to see a lot of progress with artificial intelligence and machine learning outside of healthcare, because as you can probably understand and assume, healthcare is so heavily regulated that things are going to move more slowly. But it's really exciting. Like, we're just at the beginning. And I know that like right now at Medtronic, we have, GI Genius, which is focused on polyp detection at the moment, but there's going to be so much more to come. And I feel like not only is it going to help with, image processing and diagnosis, but I feel like there's going to be impact, all across the gut. So not just the colon, but also in potentially like with therapeutics, right. Potentially with workflow optimization and improving our efficiency, because there's so many like cumbersome parts of healthcare and our jobs as clinicians that I feel like could be just way more efficient and streamlined, that AI could really help us out with. And it's just interesting because like, we've been surrounded by AI for so long in a lot of different ways in our daily lives, right? Through like, even if it's just GPS or if it's like, other, or social media, like the algorithms that are recommending the content to us is in some ways is like learning our habits. But applying it to healthcare, this is something pretty new, and not only are, doctors and health professionals learning about how to use it, how to implement it, but, the regulatory bodies are also trying to figure out how to move things forward with this. And so everyone's trying to learn together. And I think, now that computing power is capable of supporting, this type of technology, I can only imagine where we're going to be 5, 10 years from now.
No, and I think if you're not on the train, you need to get on it. I had a few partners when we got GI Genius in our practice. They said, I don't need that. I said, well, what are you driving? Tesla. Do you have auto drive on it? He's like, yeah. I was like, huh, do you use it? I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And I understand, like, we're all very, risk averse and hesitant to change. And that's just the nature of us as physicians, right? And that's like on us as as Medtronic, to generate the clinical evidence that's necessary to support the fact that it will improve clinical outcomes and that, it will improve what we're doing as physicians. And so, yeah, I think that things don't happen overnight, and I totally get that. But in the amount of time that we've had this technology out, I feel like we've already made some pretty tremendous strides. And like I said, this is just the beginning. There's one feature really at the moment, and there's just going to be more and more that we'll see, I think, across the entire industry.
No, that's awesome. And Austin, I think we don't have as much time, but I wanted to also just give you a few minutes just to kind of anything that you wanted to touch upon before we finish up the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I am in a very unique situation being in all these different worlds, right? Like the clinical practice space, medical device and med tech, social media. And I feel like I have I've developed a unique perspective on the ecosystem of healthcare. And that's pretty rare because as a clinician, right before I got into all of this, I feel I didn't have a look behind the curtain. I didn't really understand what it took for innovation to be developed and how to bring something from a concept to the market. And now that I have a better sense of it, it's not perfect. I'm still learning every single day because it's very complex, but I am hoping to, continue to share my insights. I feel obligated really to share this with the rest of the GI community, the greater physician community as well, because there's so few of us physicians, I think, involved on the innovation side of things. That it's slowing everyone down. And I feel like if I can play that role of like being a medical voice internally for us at Medtronic, I also want to, share my experiences with everyone. So I'm here to be a resource for everyone. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. If you just click my name, I'm sure things will pop up, maybe some of which I would rather not, but some embarrassing, cringy TikToks here and there. But please reach out because I want to be a resource to everybody.
No, I think and I think people appreciate that. And I know just by talking to some of the younger physicians out there, through social media or even at conferences, that they do look up to you, and then that's a little bit of a burden, I think, as a person to have people looking up to you. But at the same time, you've earned this platform that you have, and to use that and to kind of remember to be a resource, that's really admirable, and I'm glad that you do that. I appreciate that as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you again for all your time. I know, between flights and stuff, it's challenging, but just a few little quick comments that I make at the end of every podcast. The first one is, if you're listening to this and you're in gastroenterology, I encourage you to join your societies, whichever one, is the one that you subscribe to, whether it's ASGE or ASLD or even ACG, etc. Austin and I are on a committee over at ASGE, and we do a lot of good work in trying to get some of the public health messages across to Congress. And I think, getting involved with your society is a way to help all of us do better. And then the final one is my, public service announcement for anybody that's suffering with mental health issues. We live in a world where it's a big problem. And in our kids, my daughter's 18 and she's fortunately done really well, but social media is a big driver for depression, anxiety, and other things for kids, but also for adults. And I think that if you're suffering, reach out because someone's gone through the same experience you have, and we're all there for each other. It's a small community. So once again, thank you, Austin, and I appreciate it. And I can't wait until we get to meet each other face to face at another conference or something.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care.